Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. Before you add one more task, look at the next burnout signal. I want to take this one into healthcare because healthcare teams are very good at absorbing pressure, maybe too good. A clinic can be behind, the EHR inbox can be full, portal messages can be stacking, refill requests can be waiting, a provider can need a callback handled, a patient can need follow-up after a medication change, and somehow the team still finds a way to keep moving. That is one of the strengths of healthcare. It is also one of the risks, because when reliable people keep absorbing more work, the system can start lying to leadership. Not on purpose, but it happens. The work still gets done, the patient still gets called, the note still gets finished, the chart still gets closed, the medical assistant still rooms the next patient, the registered nurse still answers the message, the care coordinator still chases the referral, the front desk still handles the call, the provider still asks for the update, and because the work keeps moving, the organization can miss the warning sign. The warning sign is not always failure. Sometimes the warning sign is that the team keeps succeeding by sacrificing itself. That is the part I want to sit with for a second. A process can look like it is working because the strongest people are quietly carrying the gap. The callback gets done because the nurse stays late. The documentation gets cleaned up because someone charts after hours. The prior authorization gets pushed forward because the care coordinator skips lunch. The portal message gets answered because the medical assistant is covering two roles and trying not to let patients feel the delay. From a distance, leadership may see completion, but up close, the team is building workload debt. That is where long-range observation matters. Long-range observation is the tool that helps a leader look past the immediate fix and ask, what does this added requirement create next? Not just today, not just this week. What does it create over the next month? What does it do to reliability? What does it do to staff fatigue? What does it do to documentation quality? What does it do to patient access? What does it do to retention? What does it do to the same people who are already carrying the day? And let me be clear, this is not an argument against accountability. Healthcare cannot run on loose standards. Patient safety matters. Medication accuracy matters. Follow-up matters. Documentation integrity matters. Compliance matters. Escalation standards matter. Discharge instructions matter. High-risk callbacks matter. Nobody serious should pretend those things are optional. But essential work still needs a home. It needs ownership, it needs time, it needs sequence, it needs a clean handoff. It needs a realistic place in the day. If the work is important enough to require, it is important enough to design properly. That is the leadership point. A lot of healthcare workload drift does not happen because one leader makes one terrible decision. It happens through a series of reasonable decisions that stack. A patient complaint becomes a new callback step. A documentation miss becomes a new audit. A safety concern becomes a new checklist. A quality metric becomes a new spreadsheet. A provider frustration becomes a new message rule. A discharge gap becomes another follow-up process. Each task has a reason. Each task has a defender. Each task can be explained. And that is what makes this hard. The question is not only does the task matter, the question is, can the system carry it reliably without quietly damaging the people who have to execute it? Picture an outpatient specialty clinic. We will call the nurse manager Elena. Her clinic supports patients with complex chronic conditions, so this is not light work. Patients are calling about symptoms, medication refills, lab results, insurance questions, prior authorizations, procedure prep, worsening conditions, and follow-up instructions. Providers are moving from room to room. Advanced practice providers are trying to keep the schedule moving. Registered nurses are handling triage questions and callbacks. Medical assistants are rooming patients, checking vitals, updating med lists, getting histories, handling messages, and trying to keep flow from falling apart. The care coordinator is chasing referrals, patient navigation, authorization status, and high-risk follow-up. Front desk staff are handling arrivals, calls, scheduling, reschedules, insurance questions, and patient frustration. That is the operating picture before anything new gets added, and the clinic has had several issues. A patient did not receive a follow-up call after a medication change. A provider noticed inconsistent documentation on patient education. A quality review found gaps in post-visit outreach. Several portal messages were answered late. 2 nurses have been staying after hours to finish documentation. A medical assistant has started skipping breaks to catch up on rooming and messages. The care coordinator is pulled into urgent patient issues several times a day. No one is refusing the work. That is part of the problem, and the most reliable people keep absorbing more. Now leadership asks Elena to tighten the follow-up process. That request makes sense. The patient follow-up gap is real. The documentation concern is real. The patient safety concern is real. The provider concern is real. So the first fix looks obvious. Add a daily callback checklist, require documentation of each patient education touchpoint, ask the nurses to review unresolved messages before leaving, have the care coordinator flag high-risk patients at the end of each day, and add a weekly audit so leadership can verify completion. Every one of those ideas has logic. Every one of those ideas can be defended. Every one of those ideas may improve visibility. But now Elena has to ask the question that separates process creation from process improvement. What does this create if the rest of the workflow stays the same? That is the long-range observation question. Because the daily callback checklist is not just a checklist. It lands at the end of a clinic day when nurses are already finishing charting, patient messages, triage notes, refill questions, and provider follow-up. The patient education documentation requirement is not just a field in the EHR. It may create another point of friction during rooming, discharge instructions, or provider transition. The unresolved message review is not just accountability. It can turn the last 30 minutes of the day into a pressure point every single day. The high-risk patient review is not just helpful. It may pull the care coordinator away from referrals, authorizations, and patient navigation. The weekly audit is not just visibility. It can become a second layer of work if the workflow itself does not get fixed. Now the task reads differently. Some control may still be needed. Some documentation may still need to improve. Some callback structure may still be necessary. But not all added control creates better execution. Sometimes added control creates after-hours charting. Sometimes it creates skipped breaks. Sometimes it creates message backlog. Sometimes it creates resentment toward one more thing. Sometimes it creates documentation fatigue. Sometimes it creates turnover risk. Sometimes it creates a process that only works when the best people keep overextending themselves. And that is not reliability. That is borrowing from endurance. I have seen versions of this pattern before, and I respect it more now than I used to. Early in leadership, it is easy to think a gap needs a task. Find the miss, add the check, find the delay, add the report, find the risk, add the follow-up. There is comfort in that because it feels like control. But over time, the work teaches you something. A new requirement is not improvement unless the system can carry it. Otherwise, you did not fix the process. You added weight to the same people and hoped their commitment would cover the design. That is not fair. And in healthcare, it is dangerous. Not dramatic dangerous, operationally dangerous. Because fatigue does not always announce itself. It shows up as late charting. It shows up as shorter tempers. It shows up as missed breaks. It shows up as message delays. It shows up as handoff misses. It shows up as quiet staff who used to give feedback and now just comply. It shows up as preceptor fatigue. It shows up as sick calls. It shows up as the charge nurse becoming the catch-all. It shows up as the medical assistant falling behind on rooming because another documentation expectation got pushed into the same visit flow. It shows up as the care coordinator slowing down on referrals because high-risk follow-up keeps interrupting the work that prevents the next delay. Those are burnout signals, and they are also operational signals. And leaders need to read them before the team crosses the line from stretch to unstable. That is the difference between a short read and a better read. A short read says, we had a callback gap. Add a callback checklist. A better read says, we had a callback gap. Where will this work land? Who will carry it? What will it displace, and what signal will tell us the process is becoming unsustainable? That is not resistance. That is responsible healthcare leadership. Now, let's look at what could break if Elena simply adds the tasks without redesigning the workload. If nurses absorb the callback checklist without protected time, charting may move later. If charting moves later, after-hours work increases. If after-hours work increases, fatigue builds. If fatigue builds, documentation quality can get worse, not better. That is the opposite of the intent. If medical assistants take on more education documentation without workflow support, rooming may slow down. If rooming slows down, providers run behind. If providers run behind, patients wait longer. If patients wait longer, portal messages, phone calls, and complaints can increase. The clinic fixed one visibility issue and created a new access issue. If the care coordinator becomes the catch-all for high-risk follow-up, referrals may slow down. Prior authorizations may sit longer. Patient navigation may get delayed. Then the patient experiences the next failure point somewhere else in the system. That is workload drift. It does not always look like a dramatic collapse. It looks like one more task becoming one more delay, becoming one more frustration, becoming one more person staying late, becoming one more preventable reliability problem. So Elena does not reject the follow-up requirement. That is important. She does not say, "We are too busy to improve." She does not dismiss the patient concern. She does not protect staff by ignoring safety. That would be the wrong answer. Instead, she slows the read down. She asks, which part of the follow-up process is truly essential? Which documentation fields actually improve care? And which ones are just proof that someone touched the work? Which tasks are duplicated? Which role should own the callback? When should the callback happen? What can be batched? What can be simplified? What can be moved earlier in the visit? What can be automated inside the EHR? What should leadership stop asking for because it no longer improves care? What should be piloted before it becomes permanent? That is a much stronger conversation, because now the team is not just absorbing another requirement. The team is designing a workflow that can actually hold it and listen. That is the part healthcare leaders have to protect. If the requirement matters, then it needs to be integrated into the day, not thrown on top of the day, integrated. Where does it live? Who owns it? What triggers it? What gets removed or simplified to make room? What does the handoff look like? What is the escalation point? What does success look like after 30 days? And what signal tells us the process is hurting the system? That is long-range observation. It looks at the requirement and asks what it becomes over time. If you are leading a clinic, a unit, a department, a patient access team, a care coordination team, a front office, or any healthcare operation where the work keeps stacking, here is the practical read. Before adding one more task, name the reason. Is it patient safety, compliance, documentation accuracy, patient experience, access, care continuity, provider support, risk reduction? Name the reason clearly. Do not hide behind vague language like, we just need to tighten this up. Tighten what? For what purpose? What risk are you controlling? What patient impact are you trying to prevent? Then identify where the task will land. Which role owns it? A registered nurse, a medical assistant, the care coordinator, front desk, the provider, the charge nurse, the clinic manager. When does it happen? During rooming, during discharge, between visits, end of day, during chart review, during the morning huddle? Who covers it when volume spikes? Who owns it when staffing is short? Who verifies it? This is where simple tasks become real. A task is never added to a blank space. It is added to a person, a role, and a day that already exists. Then check the existing load. What does that same role already carry? Patient messages, refills, triage questions, medication education, rooming, documentation, prior authorizations, referral follow-up, provider requests, callbacks, handoffs, end-of-day cleanup, preceptor work, quality tasks, audit response. If the same role already has 6 pressure points, adding a 7th does not make the work more reliable just because the new task has a good reason. Then forecast the burnout signal. What might show up over the next 30 days? Will charting move later? Will breaks disappear? Will callbacks slip again? Will portal messages stack? Will preceptors get overloaded? Will sick calls increase? Will staff become quieter? Will the best people carry the new process until they cannot? Will patient complaints shift from follow-up to access? Will documentation improve while rooming gets worse? That future signal matters. Then decide what must change with the task. If the task stays, something else may need to move. Can a duplicated report be removed? Can the handoff change? Can the timing shift earlier? Can the EHR build support it? Can the care team batch the work? Can leadership stop asking for proof that does not improve patient care? Can the process be piloted for 2 weeks before it becomes permanent? Can the team test it on high-risk patients first instead of applying it everywhere at once? That is how improvement becomes sustainable. Not perfect, sustainable. And in healthcare, Sustainable matters because the team has to come back tomorrow and do it again. Now, I want to name a few warning signs. If the best people keep absorbing the new work, the system is not improving. It is borrowing from their endurance. That nurse who always stays late, that medical assistant who always skips break, that care coordinator who always says, "I'll handle it," that front desk lead who quietly cleans up the mess after everyone leaves. Those people can make a weak process look functional for a while, but that is not a system. That is a dependency. If late charting becomes normal, do not dismiss it as a personal time management issue too quickly. Maybe someone needs better habits. Maybe, but maybe the day has more required work than the workflow can carry. If everyone is charting late, the issue is probably not everyone's individual discipline. The system is telling you something. If breaks disappear quietly, pay attention. In healthcare, people often skip breaks without making a scene because they care about patients and do not want to burden the team. That should not be used as proof that the process works. It should be treated as a warning that the process may be running on sacrifice. If one metric improves and another one gets worse, look closer. A callback metric may improve while portal messages fall behind. Documentation may improve while rooming slows down. Patient education may get documented while providers start running late. That does not mean the original task was wrong. It means the change may have moved the failure point. And if staff stop giving feedback, do not assume silence means agreement. Sometimes silence means the team has learned that every concern turns into another expectation, so they stop talking. That is a serious signal. A quiet team is not always aligned. Sometimes they are tired of explaining the same overload. This is why healthcare leadership has to be more disciplined than just adding process. The work is too important for lazy process design. Patients need safe care. Providers need support. Documentation has to be accurate. Compliance has to be protected. Access has to be managed. Messages have to be answered. Follow-up has to happen. Staff need to remain capable enough to do it again tomorrow. That last part is not soft. It is operational. A burned-out care team is not a sustainable care model. A workflow that depends on skipped breaks is not a reliable process. A documentation requirement that always moves work after hours is not clean execution. A callback process that only works because two people stay late is not stable. So before you add one more task, look forward. Ask what the task protects. Ask where the work will land. Ask what existing work it will collide with. Ask what burnout signal may show up in 30 days. Ask what must stop, simplify, combine, move, or be redesigned if the new task stays. That is the work. Long-range observation does not block improvement. It protects improvement from becoming workload drift. Because healthcare teams can carry a lot, and that does not mean they should carry everything. Some work is essential, some work is duplicated, some work is legacy. Some work protects patients, some work only protects the appearance of control. And leadership has to know the difference. Do not call every new requirement improvement. Do not rely on the strongest people to carry weak design. Do not mistake completion for sustainability. Look ahead, read the workload, protect the patient, and protect the care team, then move with control. Thanks for listening to the briefing.